today we're actually diving into some IMDb data
Oh, cool.
to see if we can figure out if that's actually true.
Nice, yeah. I mean, what's so cool about this is we're actually looking at data. Like this is not just like, oh, this is like the rumor mill. This is like,
right.
Let's look at the actual numbers and see what they're telling us.
Yeah, exactly. So for our listeners out there, are you ready to jump into the world of Gender Decoded and see where this conversation takes us?
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public outlets unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Watch them all drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
One of the things that jumped out right away when I was looking at this data was this concept of the shelf life of an actress in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Which is so awful to think about, I think. But it's like you hit 40 and it's over for you as an actress, but that's not really true for men, right?
Yeah.
So what is the data telling us about that?
So this analysis looked at over 100,000 acting credits on IMDb, which is a ton.
Wow.
And basically what it showed is that for women after the age of 40, the number of leading roles that they get offered drops dramatically.
Like how dramatic?
As much as 50% sometimes.
50%.
Compared to their male counterparts.
Yeah, and for men, it either stays the same or even increases.
That's crazy.
It's a huge discrepancy.
Yeah. And it makes you think about all of the iconic actors who were in their 60s and 70s who were still headlining these huge action movies, right? Whereas I'm struggling to come up with the female equivalent of that.
Exactly. And that's kind of what this data is pointing to. It's not necessarily saying why this gap exists, but it's definitely showing that there's a potential bias there in the way that Hollywood is viewing and casting actors as they age.
Totally. And so, I mean, I guess it makes me wonder if that's what's happening on screen, what's happening behind the camera.
Right. Are women who are directors or writers or producers, are they facing the same kind of age bias?
That's a really great question. And I think, this data kind of opens up this whole can of worms about representation in Hollywood in general. And not even just in front of the camera, but like you said, behind the camera too.
Right.
Because ultimately, who's telling the stories?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if women over a certain age are consistently being relegated to these smaller roles, what does that say about how we value their voices and their experiences?
Yeah.
And how does that ultimately affect the films that are being made and the audiences that they reach?
Right.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, it really is.
Ever notice how one single chart can sometimes really make you stop and think?
Yeah, totally. Sometimes all the data laid out right there in front of you.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. A chart that breaks down gender representation in the film industry, role by role.
And it gets pretty specific, right? We're not just talking about overall numbers of men versus women.
Nope. This chart gets into the nitty-gritty, from actors and directors to producers and editors. And honestly, some of these numbers, kind of shocking.
Yeah, I mean, it paints a pretty stark picture, especially for a year. You'd hope to see, more balance.
Okay, so let's get into it. Right off the bat, the directing category, men outnumber women 5-1. 5-1.
Wow. That's a huge gap. And when you think about it, directors are often the ones with the ultimate creative control, shaping the stories we see on screen.
Exactly. So to have that kind of imbalance, it makes you think about whose voices are being heard, whose perspectives are being represented.
Right. And it's not limited to directing either. We see similar disparities, even if they're not quite as dramatic, in other roles. I mean, we're talking writers, cinematographers.
Yeah, and even in performance roles, right? Haven't we been seeing a push for more diverse casting lately?
We have. And yet, when you look at the numbers, especially when it comes to those leading roles, the ones that really drive the narrative, there's still a significant gap.
It's like, what's going on here? Like, where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, it's a complex issue. There are probably a lot of factors at play here, but unconscious bias has got to be part of it, right? Like, when casting decisions are being made, are women being considered equally?
And then there's the whole, like, mentorship and role model aspect of it, right? If you don't see people like you in positions of power, it's harder to imagine yourself getting there.
Exactly. And we can't ignore the historical context here either. We all know the film industry has been, well, for a long time, it's been a boys' club. And those power structures, those deeply ingrained biases, those things don't just vanish overnight.
It's true. But you know what's interesting? There's one area on this chart where we actually see a pretty decent balance, art and design.
Oh, that is interesting. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Maybe it's because those roles have historically been more open to women.
Maybe. Or maybe it's something about the work itself, like fields like costume design, production design. They often require a lot of collaboration. There's a big emphasis on creative problem solving.
Which might create a more inclusive environment overall.
Exactly. It'd be really interesting to dig deeper into that, to see what lessons other areas of the film industry could learn.
Yeah. Are there specific mentorship programs in place? Do they have more flexible work arrangements? What are they doing differently?
Right, because if we can figure out what's working, maybe we can replicate it elsewhere.
Okay, so for everyone listening, whether you're a film buff, an aspiring filmmaker, or just someone who cares about seeing a wider range of stories on screen, what are the big takeaways here?
Well, first and foremost, even though some progress has been made, this data shows us that we still have a long way to go when it comes to gender equality in film.
And that we need to be, conscious consumers. Right. Pay attention to who's directing, who's writing, whose stories are being told, and whose voices are we still not hearing.
Right. And then ask yourself, what can I do to make a difference? Even small actions can have an impact.
Like maybe seeking out films by female directors.
Yes. Or supporting organizations that champion women in film.
Or just starting conversations about these issues with your friends.
Exactly. Because ultimately, a more inclusive film industry benefits everyone. It leads to more diverse storytelling, which makes for a richer, more interesting, more thought-provoking cinematic landscape for all of us.
So true. This chart is just a snapshot, but man, it sure does get you thinking about how we can all do our part to create a more equitable future for film. What a thought to, carry with us as we head back out into the world.
So next time you're scrolling through those movie options, take a look whose stories are being told and whose aren't. It's something to think about.
It really is food for thought.
So it's not just about understanding this gender-decoded thing. It's about making things better.
100%. We only scratched the surface. But here's the thing. Pay attention to how you talk, how others talk. Every single day. What are you really hearing? Could it be different if it was a man saying it or a woman? Being aware, that's the key. Then we can all make things a little more equal, one conversation at a time. Keep asking those questions. Don't let this be the end of the conversation.
Absolutely. Keep pushing for that more equitable future for everyone.
Exactly. And that's it for today's deep dive. Until next time.
See you next time.